My name is Elise Kovac. I'm 40 years old, and for a living I stand in the black skeletons of burned buildings and tell people how the fire really started. 21 years ago, my own family decided that story for me. I was 19. I was the last one to leave my father's woodshop the night it burned to the ground. He lost the use of one hand. He lost the business. And they lost any doubt about who to blame. The girl who burned down her father's shop. That became my name at every dinner, every holiday, every time money got tight. Last month they gathered the whole family to sell the house they rebuilt, and my little brother Marcus smiled at me across the table and said, "Arsonists don't get a share." Everyone laughed. What none of them knew was that an hour earlier, in the attic, I had found a box the insurance company left behind. And I can read a burn pattern the way you read a face. The dashboard clock read 4:47 when I turned onto Route 9, and the light through the windshield had that late October thinness that makes everything look like it's already a memory. 40 minutes to Millbrook. I hadn't driven this road in 6 years, but my hands still knew where it dipped before the Rourke place, still eased off the gas the way they used to when I was 17 and borrowing my father's truck. Renata's text still sat at the top of my phone, 3 days old. Family meeting Saturday, 2 p.m. About the house. Everyone should be there. Everyone. That last word had a weight to it. I knew what it meant before I knew what it meant. You don't rebuild a house on a burned foundation and then gather everyone around a table unless you're about to divide something. I work fire scenes for a living. I know what accelerant traces look like weeks after the flames are out. The way they hide in porous wood, the way they wait to be found. Renata's texts were like that. Something underneath, waiting. I gripped the wheel and let the memory come, the way I let a scene come when I first walk it. You don't fight it. You just let your eyes move. I was 19, sanding a tabletop under one bare bulb, sawdust in my throat, when my father's voice came from the office doorway. "Lock up when you're done, Elise. I trust you." Then his truck pulling out of the gravel lot, then me alone with a router and a stack of orders until 11:40, when I finally cut the lights and drove home. The phone rang at 2:30. My mother's voice was already accusing before it was even afraid. "What did you leave on? What did you leave running?" Behind her I could hear sirens. By the time I got there, the shop was a hollow black ribcage against the sky, and my father was on a stretcher with his right hand wrapped in white, already turning red. Nobody looked at me. Nobody had to. My mother's eyes did it for the whole family. The GPS chimed. Half a mile. I came around the last bend, and there it was. The house, rebuilt 18 years ago on the bones of the old one, white clapboard instead of the original gray, a porch that never existed before. 6 cars already lined the driveway. Dana's Subaru, Aunt Sophia's ancient Buick, a black Audi I didn't know until I remembered Marcus had traded up again. I sat with the engine off, hands in my lap. In my work, before I ever step into a burned structure, I stand outside it first. I read the char patterns on the exterior, the way soot climbs a wall, the way a window blows outward instead of in. Everything's readable if you're willing to look. I'd learned that reading a V pattern is really just reading where something started, find the point, find the truth. Nobody had ever once, in 21 years, asked me what I remembered about that night. Not the fire marshal, he'd asked briefly and then stopped calling. Not my parents. They had already decided the shape of the story by the time I reached the hospital, and a story like that, once it hardens, is harder to cut through than any accelerant residue I've ever tested. The girl who burned down her father's shop. I got out of the car. As I crossed the gravel, I caught it. Faint, almost gone under the lemon polish smell drifting from the porch, the ghost of cigarette smoke, coming from around the side of the house near where the old workers' break room used to stand before it burned. Marcus had sworn off smoking in front of Mom years ago. He never swore off it entirely. I filed the smell the way I file everything at a scene without deciding yet what it meant. The screen door banged somewhere inside, and I heard Dana's laugh. Too bright. The laugh she uses when she's nervous. I climbed the porch steps my father built for a house he rebuilt with insurance money that came, I now understood without being told, faster and cleaner than insurance money usually comes. I'd asked Harlan Pruitt's old office for the original claim file once, years ago, for my own peace of mind. They told me it wasn't in their archive. Not lost. Not destroyed. Just not there. I never followed up. I was following up now, whether I'd meant to or not. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open into coffee and lemon polish, into the long dining room where the whole family sat gathered around the table like a jury that had reached its verdict decades ago. At the head of it, in the chair that used to be my father's, sat Marcus. 37 years old, a folder squared in front of him like a man running a meeting he'd rehearsed all week. He looked up and smiled, easy and warm, the smile that had gotten him out of every room he'd ever wanted out of. "Well," he said, loud enough for the whole table, "look who they let walk through the door." Nobody laughed. Nobody told him to stop. Renata folded her hands. Dieter stared at the tablecloth like it owed him an answer. Dana's bright smile faltered and died. Marcus tapped the folder once, twice, like a gavel finding its rhythm, and let the silence stretch until it belonged entirely to him. Then he looked up at me, and he was still smiling. "Not what I expected," he said, tilting his head, almost gentle. "Didn't think they'd let an arsonist walk through the door." No one at the table said a word. Marcus cleared his throat and slid a stack of papers across the table like he was dealing cards. My father kept his eyes on the tablecloth. My mother watched Marcus the way she used to watch me, waiting for the right cue to nod. "Everyone gets a copy," Marcus said. "Nice and simple. House sells for $440,000. Split 3 ways after closing costs, minus what Mom and Dad already put back into it. 3 ways." I counted the names printed at the top of the columns.
Anna.
Marcus. Elise, with a single line drawn through it in blue ink, the kind of line you use when you're not asking permission. "You put a line through my name," I said. "I put a line through what you're owed," Marcus said. "Which is nothing. You want to argue that in front of everybody, go ahead." Aunt Sophia set her coffee cup down hard enough that it rang against the saucer. "Renata, are you seeing this?" My mother's mouth flattened. "Sophia, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time. She's sitting right here, and you're all acting like she isn't. She burned down a building that took your father 11 years to build," my mother said, not raising her voice, just laying the sentence down flat, final, the way she'd laid it down 2 decades ago. "I don't think that entitles her to a third of what's left of it." I kept my hands in my lap. 21 years of walking into rooms that used to be on fire had taught me one thing above all others. You don't flinch at the first spark. You watch where it's coming from. So I watched. My father's jaw worked once, like he wanted to say something and reconsidered. He reached for his water glass instead of looking at anyone, and when he drank, his hand, the good one, not the scarred one he kept curled in his lap out of habit, was not quite steady. "Dad," I said. "You've got nothing to add?" He looked at my mother, not at me, at her. A half-second glance, quick as a blink, and she caught it and looked away first, down at the papers, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there. I'd spent 2 decades reading rooms where something had gone wrong and everyone in them was lying about it, some on purpose, some without knowing they were doing it. That glance between my parents was a tell I would have flagged in a witness statement. 2 people who share a secret don't need to say anything to each other. They just need to make sure the other one hasn't cracked yet. "Your mother's spoken for both of us," my father said finally, to his glass. "Convenient," I said and let it sit there. Dana hadn't said a word since I'd walked in. She had the same blue-lined paper in front of her, and she was folding the corner of it into smaller and smaller triangles, not looking up. Dana had always been the one who left the room before the shouting started. She left it that way now, too, just without moving her chair. "Fine," Marcus said, tapping the table twice, done deciding. "Then it's settled. Dana and I split it, Mom and Dad keep the number they need, and we sign next week when the Petroviches close on it." "Next week," I repeated. Fast, I know. Buyers motivated. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the paper, at the number, at anything that wasn't my face. Uncle Bill, 3 seats down, cleared his throat like he wanted to change the subject entirely, and asked about the weather for the drive home. Someone answered him. The room exhaled around the edges of the argument, like water closing over a stone. I stood up before I trusted myself to keep watching my mother's hands, which had gone very still on the tablecloth, very deliberately still, the way hands go when a person is concentrating on not being asked a question. I'm going to get a couple of Grandma's things from the attic, I said, before the house isn't ours to go through anymore. Nobody objected. Nobody offered to come with me either, which was its own answer. The attic stairs folded down with the same groan I remembered from being 9 years old, hiding up there with a flashlight during a thunderstorm. The air was thick with insulation dust and the smell of cedar gone dry. Boxes were stacked along the beams, most of them labeled in my mother's handwriting, Christmas, baby clothes, Dad's army, and I moved along the wall with my phone flashlight, looking for anything with Grandma Kovac's name on it. You still up here? Sophia's voice floated up through the stairwell. Don't let your mother rush you. This house was your grandparents' before it was hers to sell. Give me a minute, I called down. My hand landed on a box shoved behind an old rocking chair, half buried under a moving blanket. Not cardboard. Tin, dented at one corner, cold under my palm the way metal gets in an attic that's never insulated properly. I wiped the dust off the lid with my sleeve.
A logo.
Faded, but legible. Meridian Insurance Group. The box that was supposed to have disappeared with the rest of the file, 21 years ago. The lid gave with a small crack of old paint, like something exhaling after 21 years. I crouched under the slope of the roof, the single bulb overhead swinging faintly from when I'd pulled the string too hard. Inside the box, a stack of photographs, curling at the corners, and beneath them, a coiled strip of film negatives in a paper sleeve gone soft with age. Under that, 3 pages stapled together, the top one stamped Meridian Insurance Group, claim file, and below that a line I couldn't read in this light no matter how I tilted the paper. My thumb found the edge of the top photograph. Even in the weak yellow light, I could see the shape of it, a corner of a room, blackened, the char pattern rising in an unmistakable V. I know that shape. I read that shape for a living. I tipped the photo toward the bulb, squinting, my heart doing something quick and unprofessional in my chest. The V didn't open toward the machine floor. It opened toward the back corner, toward the break room. That wasn't where I stood that night. I needed better light. I needed the loupe I kept in my truck, the one I used on real scenes, not memories. I set the box down between my knees and reached for my phone to use the flashlight, and that was when I heard the stairs. Not creaking. Groaning. The third step from the top always did that ever since I was a kid, and I'd forgotten I still knew the sound of it. Elise. My mother's voice came up before she did, and by the time her head cleared the attic floor, I already had the lid half back on the box, an old reflex I didn't examine. Renata stopped 2 steps below the top, one hand on the frame, and looked at the tin like it had teeth. What are you doing up here? It wasn't a question. I answered it like one anyway. Looking for Grandma Ivy's things. You said. That's not Ivy's box. She came the rest of the way up fast for a woman who complained about her knees at every holiday dinner. I watched her eyes go to the tin, to my hands still resting on the lid, and something moved through her face too quickly for her to catch it and put it away, the way a held breath moves through a person right before they remember to hide it. Mom, it says Meridian on the... I know what it says. Her voice had gone flat, the register she used to end conversations, not have them. That box was supposed to go out with the rest of the garage junk years ago. Then why is it still here? She didn't answer that. She crossed the floor in 3 steps and put her hand on the lid, over mine, and for a second neither of us moved. Her palm was cold. Below us a door opened and shut, faint voices still arguing about square footage and closing dates, like nothing up here mattered at all. I let go a half-second before she pulled it away from me, which meant she thought she'd won something. What she didn't see, what I'd already done in the 2 seconds before she cleared the stairs, was the negative strip and 4 of the photographs sliding flat against my ribs, tucked inside my jacket where the lining had come loose at the seam years ago, and I'd never bothered to fix it. I didn't decide to do it. My hands just did what my hands do at a scene. You don't carry evidence out in the open, you carry it where it can't walk away from you. She lifted the tin against her chest like she was pulling a child out of a burning room. This garbage should have been thrown out a long time ago. she said, and her voice had a small tremor in it now, the kind I hadn't heard from her since I was a teenager, since the nights she used to tell me my father was working late, and we both knew the bar on Route 9 didn't close till 2.
Mom.
What's actually in there? Nothing that concerns you. Then why are your hands shaking? She looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. When she looked back up, her jaw had set into the shape I remembered from every argument she'd ever won by simply refusing to keep having it. Don't dig up something that's already dead, Elise. Her arms tightened around the tin, knuckles going white against the old paint. It's for you. I'm protecting you. Protecting me from what? She didn't answer. She turned for the stairs, and it was only because I was still crouched low, still at the angle of a woman kneeling over evidence, that I caught where her eyes went on the way past me. Not to me. To the closed door across the landing below. Marcus's old room, the one nobody had bothered to take the nameplate off, even after 21 years. The motel rooms smelled like carpet cleaner and old smoke, which felt almost funny given what I was doing. I'd checked in under my own name. Room 6, the Highway 9 Inn, 2 miles from the house I grew up in. The bedspread was the color of weak tea. I cleared the little round table by the window, set my laptop bag down, and pulled the negatives and photos out of my jacket lining like I was defusing something. For a long moment, I just sat there with my hand flat on the envelope. Then I put on gloves. Not because anyone was watching. Because that's what you do with evidence, and some part of me had already decided that's what this was. I taped a spare pillowcase over the window so the streetlight wouldn't bounce off the film, killed the overhead, and clicked on my mag light, the heavy aluminum one I keep in my truck for exactly this, for scenes, for real ones. I held the first negative up against the light. The shop floor. Charred joists. A shape in the corner I recognized before I wanted to. I have stood in 300 burned buildings. I know how fire writes on a wall. It doesn't lie. It doesn't remember things wrong. It doesn't hold a grudge for 21 years. It just goes where the fuel and the air let it go, and it leaves the story behind in soot the way a river leaves a story in stone. The V was right there, wide at the ceiling, narrowing down the wall, funneling toward the break room in the back corner. Not toward my workbench. Not anywhere near the saws. I got my phone, photographed each negative against the flashlight, then pulled them into the analysis app one used for real cases, the one that lets me draw angle lines and burn pattern overlays like a cop mapping bullet trajectories. My hands were steadier doing this than they'd been all day. Work always does that to me. Line 1. Charred depth heaviest at the outlet behind the break room cot. Line 2. The wire insulation in that photo had the beading, little melted globes along the copper that you get from arcing from a circuit pushed past what it was built to carry. Line 3. And this was the one that made me sit back. A low, shallow burn pattern on the floor beside the cot, small and oval, sitting apart from the rest of the damage like its own separate signature. I said it out loud, just to hear how it sounded in a real voice. That's not sawdust catching. The room didn't answer, so I kept going, tracing the oval scorch with my gloved finger an inch above the photo paper. That's not a rag pile either. A cigarette, dropped or set down, smoldering low and slow before it ever found something worth burning. Nobody worked at that bench but Dad. Nobody slept on that cot. But I knew exactly who used to duck back there on break, propping the fire door with a paint can so Mom wouldn't smell it on him in the house. Marcus was 16 that summer. I remembered him coming in through the side door smelling like spearmint gum every single time, like he'd rehearsed it. I wrote it all in a notes file the way I'd write a report for the department, origin, indicators, exclusions, and I made myself stop twice because my sentences were getting sharp at the edges, angrier than the evidence needed them to be. Fire doesn't need my anger. It just needs to be read correctly. Then I hit the wall. For photos. A strip of negatives. No conclusion page. I flipped through the sleeve a second time, then a third, hoping I'd missed a page stuck to another, some stapled sheet with a name and a finding on it. Nothing. Every real origin and cause report ends with a signature and a signed-off opinion, the investigator's name, their determination, stamped and dated. Without it, what I had was a compelling theory from a woman with a grudge and a fire science degree. Convincing to me. Worthless to anyone else at that table. I needed the man who took these pictures. I went back through the negative sleeve by sleeve, tilting each one until the light caught the printing along the border. Kodak stock, batch numbers, and on the third-to-last frame, a grease pencil scrawl in the white margin, half-smudged. H. Pruitt, Meridian Claims. It took 11 minutes on my laptop to find him. Harlan Pruitt, licensed fire investigator, retired from Meridian Mutual in 2009, one listed number still active under a rural exchange 2 counties over. I read the number twice before I let myself dial it, the way you check a smoke detector twice before you trust it. My thumb hovered over the call button a long time. Cold calls at midnight don't usually go well for anyone. I called anyway. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and I started composing the voicemail in my head. My name, my badge number, a promise I'd call back at a decent hour. On the 4th ring, someone picked up, and there was nothing. No breath, no hello, just a thick, listening silence stretching long enough that I almost said his name into it. Then a rough, tired voice came through, slow like it had been waiting a long time to use these particular words. "You're Kovac's daughter, aren't you?" A pause, longer than the first one. "I've been waiting on this call for 21 years. I set the phone down on the motel bedspread, the polyester scratching under my palm, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. 21 years. Pruitt had been waiting 21 years. I was still turning that sentence over the next morning when I heard the knock. 3 raps, then a pause, then 2 more, a pattern I hadn't heard since I was a kid falling asleep on Aunt Sophia's couch during summer visits. I opened the door and there she was, 70 years old, wearing the same wool coat she'd probably owned since Clinton was president, holding 2 coffees and a cardboard tray like she'd driven somewhere specific to get them. "I called the diner on Route 9, she said, before I could ask. "You always liked their coffee better than anything at the house." I stepped back to let her in. She didn't sit. She stood by the window with her coat still buttoned, coffee untouched on the dresser, and I understood. The way you understand a structure is about to fail before it fails, that she hadn't come for small talk. "I need to tell you something before you go see that insurance man," she said. "Sophia, how do you know about Pruitt? Your mother called me last night, screaming more or less. Said you'd stolen something from the attic and were trying to destroy this family again." She said the phrase flatly, like she was quoting a court document. "Which told me exactly what you'd found." I sat down on the edge of the bed. My pulse was doing something unhelpful. "I was there," Sophia said. "The night of the fire. I don't think I ever told you that." I hadn't known. 21 years, and I hadn't known. I'd come by to drop off a casserole dish your mother had borrowed. Around 10, maybe 10:15. I parked behind the shop because your father's truck was blocking the front. She turned from the window. I saw Marcus, 16 years old, sneaking out the side door by the break room, cupping a cigarette like he thought that made it invisible. My mouth went dry, not because it was new information. I'd already read it in the burn pattern, in the V-shape on Pruitt's negatives, but because now it had a witness. A person. A name. "I didn't think anything of it," Sophia went on. "Kids sneak cigarettes." I didn't stay to watch him finish it. I left the dish on the porch and drove home. She wrapped her arms around herself. But around 1 in the morning, my phone rang. Your mother, hysterical, saying the shop was on fire. And I remember standing in my kitchen thinking, I smelled something on my coat. Not campfire smoke. Something sharper. Electrical, almost. I didn't think about it again for years. "Did you tell anyone?" "I told your mother. Maybe a week after. Once things had calmed down enough that people were using words like insurance and rebuild, instead of just crying." Sophia's jaw tightened. I said, "Renata, are you sure it was Elise? I saw Marcus back there that night. And do you know what she said to me?" I waited. "She said if I ever repeated that to anyone, to the insurance company, to your father, to a single soul in this family, she would make sure I never saw any of you again. She said I'd be the aunt who tried to burn the family down twice." Sophia's voice didn't waver, but her hands, wrapped around her own elbows, had gone white at the knuckles. "I was a coward, Elise. I had a granddaughter starting at your father's old lumber supplier for a summer job. I had a sister I still loved despite everything. I let it go. The open loop from the attic, the missing conclusion page, sat in my mind next to this now, two puzzle pieces angled toward each other, but not yet touching. There's something else. Sophia reached into her coat and pulled out a plastic sleeve, the kind you'd use to protect a recipe card, and inside it was a folded, yellowed sheet of paper. This came to the house maybe 6 weeks after the fire. From Meridian. I found it in your mother's desk years later, when I was house-sitting during one of their trips to Florida. I don't even think she remembers I have it. I unfolded it carefully. The letterhead matched the tin box, Meridian Mutual Insurance, and halfway down the page, one line had been underlined in pencil, not by the company, but by someone reading it afterward. Ignition source inconclusive. Further investigation into rear workshop area recommended prior to claim finalization. They wanted to look closer, I said. At the break room. At Marcus's spot. And your parents refused the follow-up. Told Meridian the claim was straightforward, that they just wanted to close it and move on. Sophia handed me the sleeve. I've carried that letter around in a shoebox for 2 decades, Elise, telling myself I'd give it to someone someday. I didn't expect someday to be a Sunday. I looked at the underlined sentence until the words blurred, and thought about how much smaller this house of theirs might have felt to me at 19 if just one adult had read that line out loud. Come with me, I said. To see Pruitt. He'll want a witness who was there that night, not just photographs. Sophia nodded once, like she'd already decided that in the car. We walked out to the parking lot together, the letter tucked inside my jacket next to the negatives, gravel crunching under our shoes in the cold morning air. I was reaching for my car door when her hand closed around my wrist, not hard, but firm enough to stop me mid-motion. There's one more thing I haven't said. Her voice had dropped, gone thin at the edges. Your father didn't just stay quiet all these years, Elise. He wasn't just a man who looked away. She swallowed. There's a thing I need you to hear before you get in that car. Sophia. Your father is the one who told me to burn it. She said it fast, like ripping tape off skin. 8 years ago, at your grandmother's funeral, he pulled me aside behind the funeral home. He knew I still had that letter. And he told me, not asked, told me, to burn it and never mention it again. Sophia's hands were still on the letter's memory, folded in her lap, like she could feel the ash of it. He said it like he was talking about a leak in the roof, she said. Something to patch before anyone noticed. I didn't ask why she'd obeyed him. I already knew the answer lived in the same house as mine, the one where you learned early that keeping the peace cost less than keeping the truth. Harlan Pruitt lived 40 minutes north, in a single-story house with an aluminum carport and a mailbox shaped like a fish. He answered the door in a cardigan, reading glasses pushed up into thin gray hair, and looked at me for a long moment before he looked at Sophia. Kovac, he said, like he already knew. Elise Kovac. This is my aunt, Sophia Merrick. He nodded slowly, like a man confirming a diagnosis he'd been expecting for years. I wondered if one of you would come eventually. He stepped back from the door. Come in before the neighbors decide I'm being arrested. His den smelled like pipe tobacco gone stale and printer toner. Filing boxes lined one wall, labeled in fading marker, cases, I guessed, going back decades. He moved slower than the file cabinets suggested he once had, easing into a recliner across from us while Sophia and I sat on a couch that creaked under us like something waking up. I read fire for 34 years, he said. Kovac Woodworks was case 41 that year. I still remember the number because it's the one I think about at 2 in the morning. I set the folder from the attic on his coffee table, the photograph with the V pattern, the singed corner, the 4 prints I'd smuggled out under a coat lining. He didn't reach for them right away. He looked at them the way you look at an old scar. Your point of origin, he said finally, tapping the photo without touching it. Northeast corner. Break room. That's what I found in 1998, and that's what I wrote. Not the mill floor, I said. I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear him say it out loud, in his own house, with no one telling him to soften it. Never the mill floor. He pulled his glasses down onto his nose. The V pattern converges low. Tight angle, consistent with an ignition source near the outlet behind the break room bench. The outlet showed arcing damage, an overloaded circuit, a space heater, and a hot plate on the same line, near as I could tell. And there was a secondary burn pattern at floor level, slow and smoldering before it caught the wall paneling. In my report, I wrote that it was consistent with an improperly discarded smoking material. Sophia made a small sound. Not quite a word. That's not what went in the insurance file, I said.
No.
Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, just old weight resettling. That's not what went in the file. He got up, slower this time, and went to one of the boxes against the wall. His fingers walked along the spines of hanging folders until they stopped. He drew out a manila folder gone soft at the corners and set it on the table next to my photographs like he was laying two halves of the same bone next to each other. I kept my copy, he said. Wasn't supposed to. But I'd been doing this long enough to know when a file was about to get rewritten by somebody who wasn't a fire investigator. He opened it. I saw my own handwriting, neat block capitals, 21 years younger than what I write now, in the statement they'd taken at the hospital. Underneath it, a typed page with his signature, dated 3 days after the fire. 2 days after I filed this, he said, your father came to my office. Alone the first time. Your mother the second. They didn't ask me to change what I saw. They asked me to write, undetermined, consistent with carelessness in the work area instead. Faster claim processing. No named party. No further scrutiny of the household. And you did it, I said. Not an accusation. Just the shape of the thing, finally spoken by the one man who could confirm it. I did it. He didn't look away from me when he said it, which was somehow worse than if he had. I told myself it protected everyone equally. It didn't. It protected exactly one 16-year-old boy, and it cost you your name for 21 years. I've had a long time to sit with that math. He slid the folder toward me.
Take it.
Match it against your photographs. It'll line up, the V pattern, the outlet arc, the low secondary burn. It was already right there in what I wrote. Nobody had to invent anything. They only had to bury it. I opened the folder fully for the first time and felt the two pieces of the record, his and mine, separated for 2 decades, settle into a single shape, like a photograph finally coming into focus. 3 sources, 1 truth. His report, Sophia's memory of the letter, and the negatives waiting back at the motel. For the first time since the fire, the story matched itself in every direction. I'd like to come with you, Pruitt said, when you bring this back to them. I'll say it to their faces if it helps.
No, I said.
I need to be the one standing there. He studied me a moment, then nodded once, like a man closing a file he'd finally finished reading. Then hear this before you go, he said. You've got evidence, Elise. But your family has had 21 years of practice denying it. They'll find a way to turn it around on you. I stood in Pruitt's driveway a moment after he closed the door, the cold biting like it owed me something. The drive back into town took 40 minutes. I used most of it rehearsing how I'd lay the photographs on the table, how I'd let the burn pattern speak before I did. What I didn't rehearse was the text that lit up my phone at a red light on Route 9, from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 6 years. Heard you're bringing evidence tomorrow. Careful, Elise. People remember what you did. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove the rest of the way with both hands on the wheel. By the time I checked into the motel, there were 4 more messages. A second cousin, an old neighbor from Larkspur Street who I hadn't seen since the funeral for my grandmother. Each one dressed differently, same shape underneath. Marcus had been busy. I called Dana. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice clipped in a way I didn't recognize. You need to talk to Marcus before tomorrow, she said, no hello.
About what?
About the story he's telling everyone. That you're still bitter about the money. That you work fire scenes for a living, so you know exactly how to fake photographs that make a case. A pause. He's very convincing, Elise. My stomach dropped an inch, slow, like a floor giving way somewhere below where I could see it. You know that's not true. I know what I know from 21 years ago, which is that everyone said you did it. Now you show up with pictures nobody's seen and a story that makes Mom and Dad into liars. Her voice cracked once, just once, and she covered it fast. I have 3 kids' tuition riding on the sale. I can't afford to pick the version of events that blows the whole thing up. I didn't answer. There wasn't a version of that sentence I could argue with quickly, and I didn't trust my voice yet. She hung up first. I sat on the motel bed with a manila envelope Pruitt had given me open across my knees, and next to it, the 4 photographs I'd kept warm against my body since last night, folded into a jacket lining. I laid them out to check them one more time before morning, the way you'd check a weapon before carrying it into a room. The photographs looked wrong. I held the top one closer to the lamp. The V pattern that should have converged sharp and dark near the outlet was softer now, grayed at the edges, like it had been left somewhere humid. 2 of the 4 had gone the same way, the emulsion lifting faintly at the corners. I pulled the negative strip from its sleeve and ran it under the light.
There.
A scratch, thin as a hair, cutting straight across the 3rd frame. The one showing the outlet itself, overloaded, scorched black in a shape no accident could explain. Not enough to erase it. Enough to make a lawyer in a nice suit call it inconclusive. Enough for a room that wanted to disbelieve me to have its excuse. I set the negative down and pressed my palms flat against my eyes. Stupid, I thought. You handle evidence for a living. You know what humidity does to a print, what a duffel buckle does to a negative left loose in a jacket lining. You treated the one thing that could clear your name like a keepsake instead of proof. I thought of the jacket, torn at the lining the whole ride from the attic to the motel. Jostled against a suitcase buckle, damp from a shower I hadn't thought about. I hadn't protected them like evidence. I'd protected them like memories. That had been the mistake. Pruitt's voice came back to me, flat and certain over the phone line an hour before I'd walked out of his kitchen. Your family has had 21 years of practice denying it. They'll find a way to turn it around on you.
Ida nodded like you understood.
I hadn't, not really, not until now, sitting on a bed with damaged film and a cousin's warning text glowing on my phone screen. Photographs alone were something Marcus could call ambiguous. Something a room already primed against me could wave away in an afternoon. I needed more than pictures. I needed the original insurance report, the one with Pruitt's signature on it, the one Renata had buried 21 years ago, and I needed someone willing to say the words out loud, in front of everyone with their name attached. Pruitt. And Sophia, who'd been close enough to the fire that night to know things she'd never been asked about. Put them in the same room. Let them corroborate each other where a photograph couldn't. I picked up the phone and typed out a message to Sophia. Can you meet me before the signing tomorrow? I need to ask you something about that night. Then one to Pruitt. Would you be willing to say what you told me, out loud, if it came to that? I hadn't finished typing when a new text arrived, from Dana. Don't blow up tomorrow's signing. I am so tired of this family. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the bedspread and sat very still, listening to the motel's ice machine cycle on somewhere down the hall, and for the first time since finding that tin box in the attic, I let myself wonder if the smartest thing I could do was pack the negatives back into their sleeves and drive home. I didn't pack anything. I sat on the edge of the motel bed for 11 minutes by the clock radio, watching the red numbers change, and then I picked the phone back up and called Harlan Pruitt. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been holding it in his lap. You still there? He said. I'm still here. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The offer to come tomorrow. Is it still open? It never closed. A pause, a chair creaking on his end. What time? 10 a.m. The house on Larkspur. Bring the report, Harlan. The one with your signature, not the copy you gave me. I want them to see it's real. I'll bring the original, he said. I kept it in a fire safe for 21 years, Elise. Feels right it comes out for this. I thanked him and hung up before either of us could say something that required a steady voice I didn't fully have yet. Sophia answered on the first ring, which told me she hadn't slept either. I need you tomorrow, I said. Not just there. Standing up. Telling them what you told me. Marcus behind the shop, the smell, the letter. All of it, out loud, in front of everyone. The line went quiet long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. They'll call me a traitor, Sophia finally said. Your mother especially. Renata doesn't forgive people who make her small in a room. I know. You're not going to talk me out of that fear. You're just going to let it sit there? Yes. Another silence, shorter this time. Good, she said. I'm too old for anyone to talk me out of my own fear. I just needed to hear you weren't going to pretend it wasn't real. I'll be there at 9:45. One more call, and this one made my hand not quite steady on the phone. I dialed the number on the closing paperwork Marcus had left behind at the house, the notary's office handling tomorrow's sale signature. A woman picked up, brisk, already halfway to the next task on her desk. Larkspur closing, 10 a.m., I have that down, she said when I gave her the address. You're one of the sellers? I'm one of the owners, I said. I have reason to think there's a title issue that changes who has to sign. I want to make sure that's on record before anyone puts a pen to anything tomorrow. A pause, keys clicking. If there's a competing claim on title, I'll need to note it in my file regardless of what happens at the table. That's standard. Good, I said. Note it. I'll bring documentation. I didn't tell her what kind. Let her find out at the table, same as everyone else. A stranger with a stamp and a legal obligation to write down exactly what she saw, whether my family liked it or not. I set the phone down on the bedspread, and for a second I let myself feel something like gratitude sitting next to something like guilt, and then I made myself get up, because feeling things had never rebuilt a fire scene, and it wasn't going to build my case tonight either. I cleared the small round table by the window and laid out what I had. Pruitt's copy of the original report, its edges gone soft with handling. Sophia's insurance letter, Meridian's letterhead faded to a pale amber, the line about the crew rest area circled in a stranger's blue ink. The negatives for frames intact, the third scratched but still legible if you tilted it right under the lamp. And my own pages, the V-pattern analysis I'd sketched at 2 a.m. 2 nights ago, arrows drawn in from the corners of the room toward the outlet behind the workbench where nobody worked. For separate sources, for different years, for different reasons to have kept quiet or not. Together they read like a scene from 4 directions at once, the way I'd been trained to read one, until the directions agreed, and there was nowhere left for a story to hide. I was almost satisfied. Then I remembered the part that wasn't about fire at all. I opened my laptop and searched the county recorder's site for the parcel number I still had memorized from childhood, the way you memorize a phone number you'll never need to dial again until you do. The deed history came up in gray text on a white screen, and I read it 3 times to be sure I wasn't shaping it into what I wanted. The house on Larkspur wasn't my parents' to sell alone. My grandfather had put it into a trust before he died, split 3 ways between his grandchildren, Dana, Marcus, and me, with my parents holding only a life estate, the right to live there, not the right to sign it away. Nobody had ever told me. I wondered if Dana knew. I wondered if my parents had simply been counting on nobody reading past the first page of a document from 1987. I thought about the folder Marcus had passed around the table, the neat rows of numbers with my name struck through, and something clicked into place that had nothing to do with soot patterns. They hadn't just taken my name from me 21 years ago. They'd been trying to take a third of a house from me all over again, betting on the same thing they'd bet on the first time, that I wouldn't check, wouldn't push, wouldn't bring anything to the table but hurt feelings, easy to dismiss and easier to outvote.
Not this time.
I printed the deed page at the motel's front desk for $2 a sheet, slid it behind the fire report, and squared the whole stack until the edges lined up like a closed-case file, the kind I hand to a prosecutor when I want no room left for doubt. A notary would be sitting at that table tomorrow with her own pen and her own obligation to write down what she saw. She just didn't know yet what she'd been hired to witness. I sat with the folder a long time in the dark, the ice machine cycling down the hall, my palm flat on the cover like something that might still get away from me if I let go too soon. I'm not coming for money, I said quietly to no one, just to hear how the words would sound out loud before I had to say them in that dining room. I'm coming to read the scene. Then I turned off the lamp and let the sentence sit there in the dark until morning found it. The dining room on Larkspur smelled like carpet cleaner and coffee left too long on a burner. 12 chairs, all full, the notary set up at the far end with her folder open. Marcus sat at the head of the table again, like the seat belonged to him now. I set my folder on the table without opening it. Before we sign, I said, I need everyone to look at something. Marcus checked his watch. We've got a 2 o'clock closing, Elise. Whatever this is, save it. It's about the fire. A few chairs shifted. Aunt Sophia sat straighter beside me. Dana looked at her hands. Here we go, Marcus said, and he smiled at the room, inviting them to smile with him. The arsonists got a presentation. Nobody laughed. That was new. I opened the folder and laid the first photograph flat on the table, turning it so it faced outward, toward him, toward all of them. The image was faded at the edges, but the char pattern was still legible, a dark wedge spreading up a wall, wide at the top, narrow where it met the floor. This is a V pattern, I said. Fire investigators read them the way you'd read a compass. The point of the V tells you where the fire started. The spread tells you how it grew. I placed my finger at the narrow base. This one starts here, in the break room, not at the workbenches. That's not what happened, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its edge, just slightly, like a rope starting to fray. I laid down the second photo. A close-up of an outlet, blackened. The plastic housing melted into a shape that wasn't a shape anymore. Overloaded outlet. Space heater and a hot plate on one circuit rated for half that load. And here, I set down the third photo, the low, smoldering scorch near the baseboard. A burn pattern consistent with a dropped cigarette left to smolder before it caught. Low heat, long dwell time. That's not how sawdust ignites at a workstation. That's how upholstery catches from an ember. The room had gone very quiet. Somewhere behind me a chair leg scraped the floor. This is the break room, I said, where the guys took their smoke breaks. Where you took yours, Marcus, when you were 16 and thought nobody noticed. Marcus stood up, so fast his chair hit the wall. This is insane. You're standing here with some water-damaged photos trying to rewrite 21 years because you didn't get a check. I brought someone who can speak to the photos, I said, and I didn't raise my voice to say it. Harlan Pruitt stood from his chair near the window. He was a big man gone soft with age, but his voice still had the flat authority of a man who'd spent 30 years testifying. I investigated that fire, he said. I wrote the original report. Point of origin, break room, northeast corner. Probable cause, electrical overload with a secondary ignition source consistent with unextinguished smoking material. He looked at Dieter, not at Marcus. That report was filed. Then it wasn't the one that got signed. That's a lie, Renata said. Too fast. I have my copy, Pruitt said. I've had it 21 years. I kept it because I never liked what I was asked to do with the original. Sophia stood next. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't stop for that. I saw Marcus behind the shop that night. I smelled smoke before anyone called it in. I told you, she said, looking straight at Renata now, and you told me if I ever said it out loud, I wouldn't have a family left to say it to. I felt the room turn, not loudly, not with any single gesture, just a shift in where people were looking. Away from me, toward the head of the table. Marcus, I said quietly, were you at the shop that night? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the photographs like they might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough. I was 16, he said finally. His voice had changed completely, gone thin and young. I went back after Elise left. I just wanted to smoke before Dad got home. I heard him coming and I put it out on the floor. I thought I put it out. He stopped. Swallowed. I saw smoke starting by the wall. I panicked. I left. Nobody moved. A clock I hadn't noticed before was ticking, absurdly loud in the silence. You let them tell everyone it was me, I said. Not a question. Just the fact, set down on the table next to the photographs. One more piece of evidence. Marcus didn't answer that either. He sat back down, slowly, like his legs had stopped being reliable. Pruitt cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The insurance file. The claim adjuster's notes flagged the discrepancy. Same month the report changed. Somebody made calls to keep that quiet too. Whose name is on those calls? Dana asked. It was the first thing she'd said all day. Kovac, Pruitt said. Just Kovac. Doesn't say which one. I looked at my mother. She didn't look away, but something in her face had gone very still, the way water goes still right before it's about to move. I closed the folder. In the silence, I turned to my parents. "Now the two of you," I said. "How long have you known?" My father's burned hand, the one he'd carried like a badge for 21 years, was shaking against the table. He opened his mouth. He couldn't look at me. The silence stretched. Then Renata's chair scraped back against the hardwood, a sound too loud for the room.
Fine, she said.
"You want it said out loud? I'll say it." She stood at the head of the table where Marcus used to sit, and for the first time in 21 years, she looked directly at me. We went to Harlan Pruitt's office 5 days after the fire. He told us the report would say electrical fault, smoker's negligence, point of origin the break room. He said it like it was a formality. Renata's hands were flat on the table, pressing down like she needed the wood to hold her up. I told him no. I told him to write it up as undetermined. Your father signed the insurance release the next morning. You told him no, I repeated. My voice came out level. I had learned, in 21 years of standing over other people's ruins, how to keep my voice level over the worst things. You didn't ask him to look again. You told him what to write. I was protecting this family. You were protecting him. I didn't point at Marcus. I didn't need to. Every head at the table had already turned. Dieter finally spoke, and his voice had none of the weight it used to carry across a dinner table. Pruitt called me that same week. Said there was smoking material near the outlet. Said the burn pattern didn't fit the machine floor. I told him kids make mistakes, and machines are expensive to blame. He looked at his ruined hand resting on the tablecloth, the scar tissue shiny under the dining room light. I used the claim money to rebuild this house. I knew what I was doing when I signed it. Nobody at the table moved. Aunt Carol's fork was still resting against her plate from 20 minutes earlier, untouched. I watched my cousin Wade's jaw work like he wanted to say something and couldn't find the shape of it. 21 years, Sophia said quietly into that silence. You let a 19-year-old carry it for 21 years. She was already leaving for the fire academy, Renata said, and it came out thin, almost pleading. She was strong. Marcus wasn't. I was strong because nobody gave me a choice, I said. Dana made a sound then, something between a laugh and a gasp, and when I looked at her, my sister's face had gone the color of old paper. Dana had spent the whole evening gripping her paperwork like a life raft. Now she set it down flat on the table, both hands pressing it still. I told her not to come today, Dana said, to the table to nobody. I told her not to make a scene. Her eyes found mine. I sided with the money. I knew something was wrong with the pictures being ruined, and I didn't ask why, because I didn't want to know why. Her voice cracked on the last word. I'm sorry. Elise, I'm sorry. Marcus hadn't spoken since his confession. He sat with his hands folded like a man in church, staring at a water stain on the tablecloth. When he finally looked up, it wasn't at me. It was at his mother. You let me believe it too, he said. For a while. When I was 17, 18, I used to wonder if maybe I'd dreamed it. You told the story so many times, I started doubting my own memory of that night. Renata didn't answer that. She looked instead at her hands, and for the first time all evening, she looked old. The notary, Miss Aldridge, cleared her throat from the end of the table. She'd been quiet through all of it, pen-capped, papers untouched since I had first spread the photographs across the tablecloth. Now she opened her folder and pulled a document I hadn't seen before, one she'd pulled from the county records that morning at my request. Before anyone signs anything, she said, I need to note for the record that this property is held in a trust established by Joseph and Ivy Kovac in 1987. The trust names 3 beneficiaries in equal share, Elise, Dana, and Marcus Kovac. Dieter and Renata Kovac hold only a life estate, not the right to sell. They cannot execute a sale without signatures from all 3 trustees. Aunt Carol's fork finally hit the plate. You knew that, I said to my mother. I already had my answer. Renata's silence answered it. So, there was never going to be a check with my name crossed off, I said. There was only ever going to be a sale you didn't have the right to make. Marcus put his head in his hands. Wade pushed his chair back and left the room without a word, and that single scrape of wood against floor seemed to break something open. After that, the room emptied in pieces. Aunt Carol gathered her purse without meeting anyone's eyes. A cousin I barely knew touched Marcus's shoulder on the way past, not in comfort, in something closer to a wide berth, the way you skirt something you're not sure is safe to stand near. "I don't want the money," I said, into what was left of the table. "I never wanted the money. I wanted you to stop calling me an arsonist at every family dinner for the rest of your lives." Nobody answered that either. Dieter's ruined hand had curled into something like a fist on the tablecloth, and I couldn't tell anymore if it was anger or shame, and maybe by now it didn't matter which. It was Sophia who moved first. She rose from her chair, came around the wreckage of the table, and put her arms around me in front of everyone left in the room. I held on to her a moment longer than I meant to, my face against her shoulder, breathing in the smell of her wool cardigan and something underneath it, cedar maybe, from a closet she'd probably had for 30 years. Then I stepped back. The room had gone quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet after something breaks, and everyone is deciding whether to sweep up the pieces or just leave them on the floor. I did not look at Marcus. I did not need to see his face again. I started gathering the photographs, squaring the edges the way I do at a real scene because habits do not care what kind of day you're having. Pruitt helped me without being asked, sliding the negatives back into their sleeve with 2 fingers, the way you handle something that has already done its job and doesn't need to be handled roughly anymore. "You did that clean," he said quietly. 21 years, and you did that clean." "I had good material," I said, and nodded at the sleeve in his hand. Dana came around the table's other side. She didn't hug me. She's not that kind of person, and I've never wanted her to be. She just stood there for a second, arms crossed, looking at the space where the sale documents had been before the notary quietly folded them back into her briefcase. "I should have called you," Dana said. "Any of the years. I should have just called you." "You're calling now," I said. "That's not the same." "No," I said. "But it's not nothing either." She nodded, like that was a number she could work with, and said she'd call Sunday. I believe her more than I'd believed anything she'd said to me in 2 decades, because she said it like a fact and not like an apology, and facts are the only currency I really trust anymore. My mother had not moved from her chair. She was looking at her hands. My father stood near the window with his scarred hand tucked into his jacket pocket, the way he always holds it in rooms with too many eyes. I walked past them on my way to the door. I stopped because I owed myself that much. "You don't have to say anything," I told them. "I'm not asking for it." My mother looked up. "Elise." "I know you knew," I said. "I've known since the notary read that letter out loud. I don't need you to say it again. I need you to sit with it. That's yours to carry now, not mine." I left before she could answer, because I had already gotten what I came for, and it wasn't in that room anymore. Outside, the porch light Marcus had installed for the open house was still burning uselessly in the afternoon sun. I stood on the steps and realized my shoulders had actually dropped. An inch of tension I hadn't known I was carrying since I was 19 years old, standing in a driveway smelling smoke I hadn't set. The notary's letter did its work quietly over the following weeks. A trust needs 3 signatures, and one of those names was done being erased, so the sale collapsed the way sales collapse when the paperwork simply won't lie anymore. I got the call from Dana on a Tuesday. "It's dead," she said. "The buyers walked. The house is staying in Grandpa's name, the way he wrote it." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and didn't say anything for a second because I was listening for the part of me that used to flinch at bad news from that family, and it didn't come. Marcus was gone by spring, some property management job outside Columbus, and nobody at the next Thanksgiving asked where his chair should go. My parents still live in that house. I drove past it once, months later, on my way to a call 2 towns over, and didn't stop. I didn't need to. The truth was already inside those walls with them, and that struck me as its own kind of sentence. Quieter than a courtroom, longer than mine had been. Dana calls most Sundays now, actual calls, not texts. "You'd have made a good cop," she told me once. "You just went and got the evidence." Sophia calls every day, and I let her, because some people you don't ration. I went back to work that Monday. Different fire, different house, same job, reading a room after it's already burned, looking for the one small true thing underneath all the stories people tell to protect who they love. I used to think I did this work to prove something about myself. I understand now I do it so some other 19-year-old doesn't spend 21 years answering for somebody else's cigarette. You don't have to burn yourself down to keep other people warm. I spent 2 decades doing exactly that without knowing its name, and the day I stopped, nobody died. The house didn't fall. The family that mattered got smaller and truer, and that turned out to be enough. If somebody handed you a story about yourself you never agreed to, go find the evidence. It's usually still there, waiting in a tin box, for someone patient enough to read it right.